Wow, there's a lot of people here. Congratulations. Hey, Shay, you did awesome. Come here. Look at them all. Look at them all. Look at her. Look at her. Look at them. Look at her. Look at them. Look at her. Yes. If you build it, they will come. This is amazing. You know, it was a big crowd also in Phoenix. Usually, when someone says we expect a certain number of people, based on my experience doing activism in GMOs for 17 years, I multiply that by 50%, and then again by 50%. And that sets my expectations, so I'm not disappointed. And here, there's an expected number of 200. How many were there now? There's over 300 now. Same thing with Phoenix. It's like, we'll expect this much, and all of a sudden, like, an extra 150 people showed up. What is it in Arizona? Wow. Okay, how many people here are farmers? Raise your hand. Let's hear it for the farmers. Thank you, farmers. And gardeners. How many people are gardeners? Yes. Nice. Good going. How many people here eat? Now, only half a dozen people raise their hand. It is in the air and in the water here. So on the film, Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives, there are 3 parents interviewed, and their kids, their sons, have autism. And all 3, including a doctor, say that when their sons got off of GMOs, there was an improvement either in their digestive problem or their behavior or both. So good luck on that. So by switching to organic, you're not just eliminating GMOs, you're eliminating a lot of the toxins that are used in conventional food. And organic has higher levels of antioxidants, and it has higher levels of vitamins and minerals on average. Okay? What are some other ways that you avoid GMOs? Yes?
If you do gardening, do buy heirloom seeds.
Heirloom seeds, right. And so if you're gardening, then you're eating whole food, not processed food. So a lot of people switch out of GMOs by getting more whole, unprocessed foods. And if you're eating the processed foods, and then you switch to unprocessed foods, how do we know that it's the non-GMO versus the additives, the preservatives, the red dye number, whatever, right? And then some people, we went to the doctor's offices and we talked to the 12-year-old and the 9-year-old and the 20, someone who was on a non-GMO diet for 25 days, and she said her Crohn's disease disappeared in 3 days, and she had had it for 30 years. And her skin was clearing up and she had lost 10 pounds and she was more energetic. Someone who was told her irritable bowel would not go away for the rest of her life unless she took 2 pills 3 times a day. Within 6 to 8 weeks, no more pills. Another person with irritable bowel disappeared in 2 to 4 weeks. But we asked them, what are you doing? And they said they eat organic, 100% organic. They've eliminated processed foods as much as possible, and some, based on their diagnosis, have eliminated gluten and dairy. And when they hear this, I throw my hands up and say, too many cofactors. I can't deal with this information. I can't deal with it because there's too many ways that someone could say, how would you know it's the GMO? However, when we talk to the veterinarians and when we talk to the farmers who've taken their pigs or their cows off of GM soy and put them on non-GM soy, or their GM corn and put them onto non-GM corn, there were no cofactors. There were no gluten-free pigs, no dairy-free cows. And when the Danish pig farmer switched from GM soy to non-GM soy, didn't tell his farmhand The farmhand showed up after 2 days and said, "You've changed the feed." And the farmer said, "Uh-oh, why?" He said, "There's no more diarrhea." 2 days. The diarrhea was deadly. It was killing piglets on a regular basis. It was massive. It was impossible for them to treat until 2 days on a non-GM soy diet. Diarrhea, it's called for pigs. Irritable bowel for humans, which cleared up in the people in Chicago. Same thing, right? The pig farmer. He had 36 pigs die from ulcers or bloat in 2 years. No more death from those problems in the year of non-GM soy. And we heard acid reflux, acid potentially contributing to ulcers in humans. We see a similar thing in animals. So the same pig farmer, higher conception rate, bigger litter size. Not the same as humans. But we have the experience of the reproductive disorders. People getting a tremendous amount of infertility now. People sometimes change their diet and they can have children. And I was going around the country speaking at farmers' conferences last year around this time, and I asked what experiences you've had when you took animals off of GMOs. And one person who's in the film described how one of his clients called him up stuttering and stammering and so excited, and he didn't know what was going on. He said, "What's up?" And he says, "You remember you told me to switch to non-GMO?" And the guy said, "Uh-oh, what?" Well, here was the story. This guy had 3,000 piglets in nurseries, and he had the easiest job on the farm years ago, and was reminded of the fact regularly by his brothers, who didn't have the easiest job on the farm. But 14 years ago, something happened, and they believe it was the genetics, the new pigs brought into the area from other states and from Canada. All of a sudden, he had the hardest job on the farm, because he was inoculating all these piglets all the time. They were sick, they were tired, they would rest all the time. They were completely unlike he had seen, but it became the norm for more than a dozen years. And they grew non-GM corn, and they fed it to the pigs. And after 3 days, he and his brother were in one of the houses with 750, and they noticed that the pigs acted completely different. Normally, they'd get into the stalls and the pigs would get up and they'd start moving around, and then they'd lie down before they even left the stall. Now they were just up and bouncing and playing like piglets. And they joked and said, "Well, maybe it's that non-GMO corn." And they just joked until 11 days later, until 11 days after they switched, is when he made the phone call. Because it all came together. The pigs were getting better each day and each day. The medicine use just dropped out of the bottom. He showed me the chart, right down. Same thing with the Danish pig farmer. The Danish pig farmer got rid of GM soy. The Iowa farmer that I'm talking about, he was still using GM soy. He was getting the results just by switching out the GM corn. He couldn't even find non-GM soy. And he had this dramatic result. And he said what you said, what so many farmers and veterinarians have told me, that their animals were happier. In fact, there was a South African farmer who explained to a US-based veterinarian that his cows were having very low production and low reproduction and milk production and joint problems, and the pigs were having serious problems and aggression problems and cannibalism and biting the tails and the ears off the neighboring pigs, and some would wander around like they had Alzheimer's, unable to find the feed, and they would just die, and there was all sorts of horrible things, and he was barely able to stay in business. And Dr. Dan Scow just gave a bunch of recommendations, and the guy says, "Look, just tell me one thing to do." He said, "Don't plant a GMO ever again." So we removed the GMOs, planted some corn, and his took a while to improve. I think 60 or 90 days, and all the problems disappeared. And then he ran out of the non-GM corn, and had to buy corn from the market. All the problems came back. And then he had planted enough corn to last the whole year, put all the animals on the non-GM corn, it was fine. The workers in South Africa were eating the corn grown on the farm. And in South Africa, corn is a staple, eaten about as much as 70% of the food. Corn, lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And these workers were so sick, he had spots for 50, he had to keep 60, because so many were sick. He had to pay all this money for expensive medicines, for inflammation, etc. They had severe headaches, flu-like symptoms, colds, and he said once or twice per month, he would be talking to one of the workers and the eyes would go in separate directions. And he knew that that person would be dead in less than 2 days. So he was losing 1 or 2 workers a month. And then he switched to non-GM corn for the animals. And the workers got better. And when he ran out and had to buy corn from the marketplace, the workers got sick again. Until they were back on non-GMO. So that was probably a place where people were eating more GM products than anywhere else in the world. Because they're eating at 100% GM, not just the percentage grown in the market that's mixed, but right off the farm, 100% is the majority of their diet. Now, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine looked at the animal feeding studies in 2009 and determined that there was a causal relationship between the animals eating GMOs and a series of disorders and diseases. And they said they should be removed from the market, there should be labeling, every doctor should prescribe non-GMO diets. And they specifically said the categories of diseases and disorders that they were seeing. These may be familiar to you by now in the lecture. Reproductive, immune system, gastrointestinal, as well as organ damage, accelerated aging, and dysfunctional regulation of cholesterol and insulin. Thousands of doctors now prescribe non-GMO diets. And they're reporting these type of things in their patients, sometimes 3 days, 2 days, a week, a month, depending on the condition, getting better. These same problems are on the rise in the US population since GMOs were introduced in 1996. We think it's not a coincidence. We think GMOs are a major contributor to ill health in humans and animals in North America. Now, how could it be that this corn and soy and a few other things are causing these type of problems? So I'm going to take a few minutes to describe the characteristics of GMOs and why the corn and soy are predisposed to cause these type of diseases and disorders. Now would be a good time to explain what a GMO is, because some of you don't know and may feel a little embarrassed that we're having so much of a discussion. People are already removing it from their diet and you don't know what GMO stands for or what it is because your friend just brought you along to this lecture and you had to do it because they were driving. Genetically modified organism. You take a gene from one species and you force it into the DNA of another species. The primary reasons they genetically engineer crops, there's 2 major reasons. In the first case, the most popular is called herbicide tolerant. And the biggest variety in that is called Roundup Ready. Monsanto scientists found bacteria growing in a chemical waste dump near their factory, not dying in the presence of Roundup, which normally kills bacteria. So they figured, great, let's put it in the food supply. So they took the gene from the bacterium that allowed the bacterium to survive and put the gene into soybeans so they can spray the soy field with Roundup herbicide and it kills all the other plants, the weeds, but not the Roundup Ready soybeans. And the Roundup Ready soybeans drink the Roundup and then deposit it a lot of it in the food portion, which is eaten by us. And that's 80% or more of the GM crops on the market, herbicide tolerant. They're designed to make weeding easier. The other is called BT crops. BT stands for Bacillus thuringiensis. It's the name of bacteria that's in the soil. And some of you farmers and gardeners may spray BT on your crops by gathering the spores and the bacteria and putting it into a spray bottle. You can kill certain types of insects by breaking open their stomachs, creating little micropores, little pores in the cell walls, breaking open the integrity of their digestive tract and killing them. And so the genetic engineers take the gene that produces the toxin called BT toxin, they remove it from the bacterium, they make millions of copies, put it into a gun, like a gene gun. It's called a gene gun. You shoot the gun into a plate of millions of cells, hoping that some of those genes make it into the DNA of some of those cells, and they clone those cells into a plant, and now every cell of these BT corn plants has a little gene-sized spray bottle that will kill insects by breaking open their stomachs. And unlike the BT toxin which you may spray on your garden, it washes off. It biodegrades, but not the encapsulated poisons, which are produced at thousands of times the concentration of the spray, designed to be more toxic, have properties of a known allergen, and it's in the corn we eat. And it's in cotton. Those are the two main reasons they genetically engineer: to drink poison or to produce poison. And if you look at those two characteristics, we can then understand why immune problems, gastrointestinal problems, and reproductive problems, as well as organ damage, may be occurring. Let's look at the BT. We were told by Monsanto and the EPA, which registers this BT corn plants as registered pesticides, that BT toxin has a history of safe use. It's okay. Turns out, thousands of people, well actually 500 people in the Pacific Northwest showed allergic and flu-like symptoms. Some went to the hospital when they were sprayed by gypsy moths. Farm workers were tested and showed to have an immune system response to the BT. The EPA's own scientific advisory panel said, clearly there's allergic responses here, we need to investigate. And clearly the EPA ignored them. So that assumption was false. So we have an allergen, something that can promote immune system responses in mice in its natural form, in its more concentrated and more toxic form, maybe promoting immune responses in humans. In fact, the mice that were exposed to the BT began to have sensitive reactions to formerly harmless substances, not just the BT. So you can be eating BT corn and all of a sudden you're reacting to peanuts or wheat or something else. So the BT property of being an allergen or an immunogen is sufficient to describe or to support why consumption of BT may be promoting immune system responses in North Americans. But it gets worse. The biotech industry also claimed that the BT toxin has no interaction with human cells. But last year, in the Journal of Applied Toxicology, released this month last year, that was proven to be false. They took the BT toxin out of Monsanto's corn and they exposed it to human cells, and it poked small holes in the cells, causing leakage similar or identical to what happens in insects. But they said, don't worry, BT toxin, this is the third assumption, BT toxin is destroyed in the stomach digestive process. So it's completely benign. No, it wasn't destroyed in the stomach digestive process in the mice, but don't worry, it's completely destroyed. And that was disproven a year and a half ago in Canada, where they found the BT toxin in the blood of 93% of pregnant women and in 80% of their unborn fetuses. So we have a substance which pokes holes in human cells, probably getting into the bloodstream because it has created leaky gut, getting into the bloodstream and then into the unborn fetuses where there's no blood-brain barrier, possibly into their brains. Now, the people who were designing the study were surprised that 93% of pregnant women and about 2/3 of non-pregnant women had the Bt toxin in their blood because it's washed out quickly, or so they thought, washed out quickly. So if it's washed out quickly, it has to be put in, constantly put in for such a high percentage. But it's Canada, it's not Mexico. They don't eat corn tortillas every day. But the animals eat corn every day. So they believe that it was actually the milk and meat of animals that were fed GM corn, where not only it survived the digestive process in the animals, and then was intact to survive the digestive process in the humans, and somehow get into the bloodstream and possibly wreak havoc. I think a more logical and plausible explanation is traced back to a 2004 study. It was the only human feeding study on GMOs at the time. They took 7 volunteers, and they wanted to see if genes were destroyed during digestion, because that was another one of the assumptions. Because the FDA scientists who were reviewing the first application for GMOs, the flavor saver tomato, were shocked that they were going to have a gene in there that was allowing the cell to be resistant to death by antibiotics. They said this could transfer to disease bacteria, creating antibiotic-resistant diseases, unkillable with antibiotics. They said it was a serious health hazard. They were told, don't worry, genes are destroyed during digestion. Gene transfer cannot occur. So they said, well, at least verify that assumption, and no one did until it was published in 2004. A brilliant study. They took 7 volunteers. They had ileostomy bags. They had their lower intestines removed, not for the study. It won't hurt a bit, really. We'll pay you $100. It's for science. And they fed them soy burger and a soy milkshake, genetically engineered. And they were surprised to find how much intact genetically modified soy survived the passage through their stomach and small intestine and was found in the ileostomy bag. But in 3 of the 7 volunteers, before they were fed the meal, inside the DNA of gut bacteria in their digestive tract was the gene that Monsanto scientists had found in the chemical waste dump near their factory that didn't die, that was put into soybeans. So at some previous time, from some previous meal or meals, these British citizens who don't eat a lot of GM soy, 3 of the 7, ended up developing genes inside the DNA of their gut bacteria that were the Roundup Ready genes. And the bacteria was unkillable with Roundup, or its active ingredient glyphosate. Because it was unkillable, it could possibly be the type of bacteria that's not killable by glyphosate, or it could be that the gene that transferred was still active and they had Roundup Ready gut bacteria. Because the protein, the Roundup Ready protein, which is produced by the gene, was being continuously produced 24/7 inside their digestive tract. Now, if that happens, it means the antibiotic-resistant marker gene may transfer and result in antibiotic-resistant diseases. And here's an even scarier thought. I major in that, actually. What'd you major in school? Scary thoughts. You know, modern education, humanities. All right. What if you eat a corn chip made of Bt corn, and the gene that produces the toxin transfers to your gut bacteria, and it continues to function, turning your gut bacteria into living pesticide factories, producing an allergen that pokes holes in human cells? That might explain why 93% of pregnant women in Canada had Bt toxin in the blood, because it may have been produced continuously inside their own digestive tract. Thank you, everyone. Everyone, I'm going now. No. I won't do that to you. We're gonna feel good at the end, believe me. Just don't leave in the middle. It'll be just a miserable night. So if you look at that, the Bt toxin, just the Bt toxin, and you think about what that can do to human beings. What happens when I speak at a medical conference and I talk about the properties of Bt toxin? Invariably, the doctors say, in my practice, I have seen an enormous growth in GI tract disorders. Inflammatory bowel, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, etc. This may explain it. Yes, if you're poking holes up and down the digestive tract, you may explain why inflammatory bowel disease is up 40% since GMOs were introduced. And if it's causing holes in the digestive tract and causing what's called leaky gut, many scientists and practitioners say that that is a foundational cause for allergies, autoimmune disease, inflammation, cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism, etc. So Bt toxin alone can explain a wide variety of things, including organ damage. But it has stiff competition from the Roundup Ready crops. Roundup is an endocrine disruptor. It messes up your endocrine system at very tiny concentrations. So the rats and mice and hamsters that were fed Roundup Ready crops, damage to the testicles, damage to the young sperm cells, damage to the ovaries, damage to the uterus. More than half of the babies' offspring died within 3 weeks. For the hamsters, by the third generation on GM soy, most lost the ability to have babies. They died at 4 or 5 times the rate. Some had hair growing in their mouths. The mice had smaller babies and fewer babies. Astounding reproductive disorders. And Roundup is also linked to cancer and Parkinson's. But if you look at the categories, we have reproductive disorders, immune system problems, gastrointestinal. So Roundup can handle the reproductive side. It's like, I'll handle reproduction, you handle everything else. Bt. But Roundup also competes for the other two, because Roundup is a very broad spectrum, very potent antibiotic. Far greater than a lot of the antibiotics that we take with prescription. And there's Roundup, huge antibiotic, killing all sorts of bacteria. It kills the beneficial bacteria in our gut and not so much the Salmonella, botulism, and E. coli. And by doing so, it disrupts the gut bacteria's function, which is digestion and immune system. So it can also be negatively affecting the immune system and the gastrointestinal reactions. So Roundup and Bt together can explain these problems. In fact, a study came out in September where they fed just a tiny amount of Roundup in the drinking water for rats over 2 years, and they had massive multiple tumors, early death, and organ damage. And the organ damage was the liver, the pituitary, and the kidney. In fact, they find that with signs of toxicity, even in Monsanto's studies, very high signs of toxicity in the liver and the kidney. In fact, they took Roundup Ready corn and fed it to rats over 2 years, and they also developed massive tumors, multiple tumors, early death, and organ damage. So that's the bad news. The good news is that we have a plan to end the genetic engineering of the food supply, and it's already working. So that's a good news. Sure. All right, everyone repeat the applause. No, I know. I said, we actually have a plan to end the genetic engineering of the food supply, and it's already started to work. And I'll explain that in just a moment. But before I do, there's some of you who are visual learners, and so I just want to show some of the funner pictures that I have gathered over the years. Now we can put this on. Oh, you could take the hat away. The projector was wearing a hat. Okay, this is the intestinal walls of rats that were fed genetically modified potatoes, and this is the stomach lining. Now this is called potentially precancerous cell growth, okay? Much proliferative cell growth. There were no tumors here, but it could result in tumors. Now, in this study, I'm using this study to bring out another point which we haven't discussed. It was a brilliant study. They took one group of rats and fed them genetically engineered potatoes designed to produce a certain amount of an insecticide. along with a complete and balanced diet. Another group of rats were fed non-GM potatoes, same diet. The third group of rats were fed non-GM potatoes, complete and balanced diet, plus the same insecticide in the same amount that the GM potatoes were producing. So these guys had GM potatoes, these guys had non-GM potatoes, these guys had non-GM potatoes, plus insecticide. Only the GM potatoes caused these problems, not the insecticide-laden diet. So it was not the insecticide, what was it? Here's the interesting thing. When you take a gene and you blast it into a plate of cells, or you use bacteria to infect it, and then you clone those cells into a plant, up to 4 or 5% of the DNA changes. Hundreds or thousands of mutations up and down the DNA. Up to 5% of the naturally functioning genes can change their levels of expression after a single gene is inserted. So you can end up producing more allergens, like Monsanto's Mon 810 corn has a gene that was normally silenced in corn. It's switched on, it produces an allergen. Or Monsanto's soybeans, it has as much as 7 times the amount of a known allergen called trypsin inhibitor for cooked GM soy compared to cooked non-GM soy. The process of genetic engineering, as I said in the trailer, causes massive collateral damage. And this is a result of the process of genetic engineering, not the particular gene that was inserted. The same process used to create the soy and corn and cotton and canola and sugar beets and alfalfa and papaya and zucchini and crookneck squash. This is, it's a pretty bright light. I don't know if we can dim it a bit, but this is the liver cells of rats fed GM soy. You can see the gnarliness, that's the technical term, versus the non-GM. Here's rat testicles changed from pink to blue in the GM soy fed group. I'll take my drink now and let that one sink in. I just sort of let that one affect certain members of the audience. Guys. Here's the death of baby rats, 50% times 10%. The female rats were fed GM soy versus non-GM soy, and the ones that were smaller are examples of the ones that were offspring of GM soy-fed mothers. Here's the tumors, huge tumors we talked about from the GM corn. They were, when they got to 25% of the body weight, they had to put the animals to sleep. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about Roundup, because there's some interesting aspects of Roundup that most people don't know that make it even worse. When you take Roundup and you spray it on a plant in sterile soil, it'll stunt the plant compared to the normal, but it won't kill it. It'll kill the plant when it's in field soil. So why does it do that? There's 2 reasons. First of all, Roundup is originally patented as a broad-spectrum chelator. Chelation is a molecular type of hugging where it binds with these trace minerals and makes them unavailable for use by the plant. So like in alfalfa, for example, you have a dramatic reduction in all these different important trace minerals and other minerals, up to 50% reduction. And that makes the plant weak and sick and defenseless against diseases. And the Roundup also promotes diseases in the soil. So it promotes the diseases in the soil which overrun the plant. And that's how it kills, by a perfect storm. So the plants are deficient. The livestock in the US, the primary diet that they eat is Roundup-ready crops, soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beet, pulp, and alfalfa. And so we have a universal deficiency of certain nutrients, according to the veterinarians who know about this and send organs away for evaluation. So we eat the sick animals, the nutrient-deficient plants, which also have extra Roundup in it, which then chelates or binds with nutrients inside ourselves, making them unavailable. So a nutrient deficiency is another aspect of genetic engineering. And then the promotion, you can't really see these things. This one's easier. This is a diseased field with sudden death syndrome. This was sprayed with Roundup. These are the same seeds that weren't sprayed with Roundup. It creates more diseases. Here's again wheat that was planted without glyphosate sprayed here, with glyphosate. These are diseased fields of wheat. Here's, again, the Roundup sprayed here, none here. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup. 10 years of spraying with glyphosate leaves this field almost, basically scrawny compared to only 1 year, because it stays in the soil for years, sometimes decades. Now, the animals that are cut open by the butchers, they'll see that the GM-fed animals are discolored, yellow instead of white, and they smell bad. They think it's the gut bacteria that's been changed dramatically because of the genetically engineered feed. And here's some pig stomachs showing inflamed and irritated stomachs with ulcers all around it. And this is the normal color. We talked about ulcers earlier. And botulism is a problem because the bacteria that keeps botulism toxin in check is killed with glyphosate, and the botulism can take off, so you end up with bloody stomachs and lots of botulism. Then there's a bunch of spontaneous abortions in livestock all over the country now, and that may be linked to this new organism that's new to science that's being evaluated. It's in high concentrations in the aborted fetal tissue of these animals that are having miscarriages, and it's in high concentrations in their feed, but the feed that's treated with Roundup. And it may be related to infertility in humans. So when you put all this together, it's no wonder that when given a choice, animals avoid GMOs. This bag of corn was broken into by mice and eaten completely. It's non-GM corn, and this was the GM corn in the bag next door with not a kernel taken off. So we help people because the animals got it down. We've heard about pigs, cows, elk, deer, squirrels, mice, rats, geese, raccoons, chickens, dogs, and buffalo, all avoiding GMOs when given a choice. So we have to get humans up to the level of animals. We could put the lights up. I need your hat over the screen again. It's done. We can just turn it off. Okay, so now I'm going to give you the good news. How many of you feel much more motivated to avoid GMOs? Raise your hand. Okay. That is a very interesting fact. Now I'll explain why. I'm going to give you the backdrop. Remember the first slide we showed about the potentially precancerous cell growth in the 3 potato groups? Well, the scientist who did that, like almost every scientist who does research on GMOs, was attacked by the biotech industry, and they had him fired and gagged. And that happened in 1998, in August. In July of 99, no, in January 1999, things looked pretty good for the biotech industry. Monsanto's consultant had revealed at a conference that their plan was to genetically engineer 100% of all commercial seeds in the world and patent them. Another company projected a 95% takeover of all commercial seeds in the world within 5 years by the industry. So at the end of January, they were thinking about replacing nature on a fast track. 3 weeks later, that scientist's gag order was lifted by UK Parliament. And a flood of press, over 700 articles were written in the UK alone. All over Europe, there were article after article about the dangers of GMOs. The controversy, argue was going to feed the world. The people were against it were saying it's causing problems with rats. The tipping point of consumer rejection was achieved 10 weeks after the gag order was lifted. Unilever publicly committed to stop using GM ingredients by the end of the day or the next day. Nestle's followed through. Within a few weeks, it was all over. GMOs were kicked out of Europe, but not the United States. I can tell you want to applaud to sort of shake off the last half hour. All right, I'll change it into a kind of a political speech. And it was kicked out of Europe. Let's hear it. All right. So what happened was the same companies, Nestle's, McDonald's, Burger King, that sell non-GMO stuff over there, sell GM stuff over here because we don't know about it yet. But we are aware that we can have a tipping point in the United States as we have seen with bovine growth hormone. How many people have heard of bovine growth hormone? Okay, it has, according to a former Monsanto scientist, 3 of his colleagues were doing safety studies on the milk and found so much cancer-promoting hormone, IGF-1, in the milk, these 3 Monsanto scientists refused to drink milk if it was treated with Monsanto. They refused to drink milk altogether unless it was organic. One bought his own cow. So we started educating people about the cancer risk of the hormone in the milk from treated cows. It was kicked out of Walmart, Starbucks, Yoplait, Dannon, most American dairies. So we have seen a tipping point happen in the United States against a genetically engineered product. And so have the food companies. So how many market share points are they going to withstand before they get rid of GMOs? Remember, they were there. They suffered in Europe being unaware of the coming demise of GMOs, and it would just spread like wildfire. They saw, unaware, trans fats just take off, carbs taken off, sugars take off. They have seen industry faced with tipping points, one after the other after the other. And they've seen it with GMOs in Europe and a GMO substance in the United States. So, are they going to say, oh, we can't get rid of GMOs because our customers are clamoring for BT and Roundup? No one clamors for BT and Roundup. There's no consumer benefits. So we have a situation where there's something that has no consumer benefits whatsoever. Companies can change out of GMOs without even changing recipes. They can get the non-GM corn and non-GM soy. So we think any drop in market share whatsoever would be sufficient for the food industry to go, ding, sell signal, get rid of GMOs. Now, we think 5% of US shoppers avoiding GM ingredients should be enough. 15 million Americans, 5.6 million households. That should be enough, probably more than enough, to show the trend, to have the food companies see, oh, we're losing sales. So many people are talking about GMOs now. I get it. GMOs have become a marketing liability in the United States like they've become a marketing liability in Europe. So our job is much easier. We don't need to convince the junk food eating couch potato American that food relates to health. They will never know that they're eating GMOs. They'll never know we got rid of it for them. And we have more people than we need on our side. If we're looking for 5%, that's 15 million. There's 28 million Americans that buy organic on a regular basis. They already make choices based on what they intellectually believe is healthier. We have parents of young kids, maybe not for themselves, but for their kids. They'll try anything. We have pet owners, wow, very strong. We have patients who are suffering, that when they learn about the fact that someone else that had the same disease or disorder got rid of GMOs, they got better, and they're suffering, they will try it, especially if their healthcare practitioner tells them about it. So we can create a tipping point just by going to the low-hanging non-GMO fruit. The people who are ready to hear this. And it's already started. And a sign of the coming tipping point is how many people came here tonight. Look around. This is new. This is new. And another sign is the fact that 37 states have organizations trying to put GMO labeling bills or ballot initiatives together. The Prop 37 is a sign of the tipping point. The fact that in 2002, after Monsanto and companies spent millions, they swapped a 70-30 advantage to labeling to a 30-70 victory. Now it was 48.6%, even though they spent $1 million a day in a disinformation campaign. They got through by the skin of their teeth. And we see coverage on GMOs at an unprecedented level. And the world is shaking now about the possibility of introducing genetically modified salmon. And they've released GM mosquitoes in 3 countries already. So we're in a situation where, like the Earth's immune system, we're rising up. We're becoming aware of what's going on. And we're seeing the early signs of a tipping point. And one of the most important signs is the fact that non-GMO labels were the fastest growing label claim in America in 2012. And one of the fastest growing for 4 years. And an industry insider told me this information a few months ago. He said he was talking to someone, and they said, and I think that, and this person was a food company executive, and he said, I think the consumers in the United States have reached a tipping point on the GMO issue. And they were making some inquiries about changing things so they wouldn't be caught behind. So we have a situation now where I think we are going to see a Euro-style avalanche. As soon as some of the major conventional companies start advertising non-GMO, then the others are going to look around and see, wow, if it hits big time, we better start securing our supplies now, because there's not enough, there wouldn't be enough non-GMO corn and soy if they replaced all the animal feed, because it's mostly animal feed. But we think it'll start with direct derivatives and then hit animal feed a year or two later. So that's what I'm doing with my spare time. And I want to tell you, it's also what you can now do with yours. So you are cordially requested to participate in this transformation. So I'm going to give you a little pep talk. And I'm going to give you a pep talk on behalf of all living beings and all future generations. When GMOs are planted outdoors and they blow in the wind, they cross-pollinate, the seeds move, that's it. We have no technology at that point to do a complete recall. The gene pool is, unless some new science comes up, is forever contaminated with a self-propagating genetic pollution. So what we have in the form of genetic engineering is an unprecedented exposure of danger and risk to everyone who eats, to all living beings, to all future generations. When have humans had the opportunity to do so much good in their lives as to stop a threat that can negatively impact all living beings and all future generations? Our great-grandparents, our ancestors, never had this opportunity because there was no threat that big. So it is certainly, in one case, a burden and a responsibility, but I don't see it that way. I see it as an incredible opportunity and a privilege. And I'll tell you my experience working on this since 1996, that when I look to supporting all living beings and all future generations, I feel supported by all living beings and all future generations. For those of you that have been working on the GMO issue, have you felt great doing it? Have you felt great doing it? Give yourself an applause if you've been feeling great doing it. There is something about thinking globally in both directions, space and time. And now, it's also, because of the tipping point concept, it is easier to effect change. It's in the air. It took a much longer period of time in the past to change someone's diet. Usually at the beginning of a lecture, I ask people to rate themselves from 1 to 100 how vigilant they've been at avoiding GMOs, and then I ask them at the end of the lecture how vigilant they're going to be. And everyone's changed. I have how many are 1 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60. Everyone's now crowding up. No one is in the 1 to 20 ever again after hearing the lecture. And I ask people, and I'll ask you now, rate yourself from 1 to 100 how vigilant you have been at telling people, at getting the word out about GMOs. How many people were not particularly active? Raise your hand, 1 to 20, and 20 to 40, 40 to 60. 60 to 80, the very actives, 80 to 100. Any 120s like me? So now, how active do you want to be in getting the word out? Anyone? So those who don't plan to be very active, 1 to 20, raise your hand. 20 to 40, no peer pressure. 40 to 60. 60 to 80, 80 to 100. I just happen to have some ideas for you. So I see that most of you now want to get involved and help get rid of GMOs. So first of all, you have an incredible opportunity because of Shay. Because you have GM-free Prescott. And that means that you already have an organization that can take your energy, your ideas, your money, and convert it into a tipping point. So support GMO-free Prescott immediately and continuously, because your gut bacteria is depending on it. In addition, we have books and DVDs, and we picked out the ones, or created the ones, which we know do the trick. What's the trick? Change people's level of vigilance so that they're more likely to avoid GMOs. So you get the lending library, and then you get to bless the people around you, and their pets, and their gut bacteria, and their friends, and their ancestors, their great-great-grandchildren, etc. So I encourage you to pick up one copy of each of the brochures, pick up whatever books or DVDs strike your fancy, get them all if you can, and keep them circulating. And we have we're going to take the emails of everyone did everyone sign in with an email? So we'll subscribe you to our newsletter. It's free. You can always unsubscribe at the bottom with a click, but you can pass that on. You can post things on Facebook. You can become a click and send revolutionary. And we can do this together. So I don't know why Arizona has turned out so big. Because you are Arizonans, I won't go there. Some reason you have been electrified to fill this room up and then some here and in Phoenix. So you know that it's easier now in general to get the word out, and it's easier now in Arizona for some reason. It's very sticky, it's very viral. You have like such low-hanging non-GMO fruit, you just sort of say, oh, here, just listen to this audio CD in your car. Or just listen to this, read this first chapter of this book, and I'll pick it up next week. It's going to be so easy and so fun. And next time we get together, we'll be celebrating victory. So, yes. So, we're going to be doing the raffle now. So I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you even more for helping eliminate GMOs. You can all pass we'll take some questions in just a moment, and while they're collecting. But let's just say this. Let's just have the vision that very soon we will be liberating GMOs from this planet for all living beings and all future generations. Thank you very much.